Sorry, a voice reached him, too polite to not be condescending. This area is private property. He turned around. A slender woman in a light-colored pantsuit stood on the sidewalk, her face one that might have been a beauty in the Reagan era. Now it was a mask of tension and distrust. I live here, he replied, showing his key. You... Her gaze slid from his face to his sneakers, to his simple clothes. Perhaps you meant you work here. I'm Michael B. Jordan, he said curtly, and this is my home. The actor. Her face twitched. You're joking. He said nothing. He just took out the key and inserted it into the lock. A smooth turn, and the door swung open. Silence, then the sound of women's heels clicking on the tiles behind him. Listen, I've lived here for over 20 years, and I won't let this neighborhood turn into, she faltered, another Los Feliz. He turned slowly. You mean another neighborhood where people don't look like what you're used to? Her eyes flashed. I mean, this is supposed to be an exclusive place, and you're not the kind of person who lives here. Inside the villa, the walls still smelled of fresh paint, and boxes with an old piano and photos of his mom stood unpacked. He hadn't bought this house out of vanity. It was to have, for the first time in a long while, his own space. Without cameras, without contracts, without suspicion. But outside the door, someone was already calling the HOA, the Homeowners Association. An hour after Michael's arrival, a silver Lexus pulled up to the villa. A lanky man in a polo shirt with a golf club emblem stepped out. Mr. Jordan, we received a complaint. Your presence has caused concern among the residents. Some believe the sale of the house happened without the neighborhood council's approval. The house was listed on the open market, Michael replied tersely. Everything was done legally. The thing is, as a community, we're used to a certain lifestyle. And your presence... He paused. My presence isn't a violation. It's a challenge to your idea of normal. Couldn't you? The man glanced around. Sell it back. Michael laughed, quietly, hoarsely, but a shadow flickered in his eyes. Not anger, something deeper. Fatigue, and a memory of every "you're not the type" he'd heard over the past 20 years. I didn't buy this house for show. I bought it so I wouldn't have to prove to anyone that I have the right to be where I am. That evening, as the sky turned pink and blue like an old California postcard, Michael sat on the floor in the empty living room. Before him was a photo of his mom, still from Newark. He held it in his hands like a talisman, and then a sharp knock at the door. He stood up, opened it, the same woman, the neighbor, but now with a lawyer. We're initiating an eviction procedure, the lawyer said, pulling out papers. You violated the neighborhood covenant. We have the right to contest your residency here. You mean create a problem where there wasn't one? The lawyer silently placed an envelope and left. The woman, no longer smiling, whispered, We'll do this the right way. You'll see. He closed the door, and for the first time in a long while, he stood for a long time, pressing his forehead against the wall. This wasn't a home. It was a battlefield. And someone very wealthy, very white, and very convinced of their righteousness was already preparing for war. But they didn't know who they'd underestimated. Michael B. Jordan sat on the defendant's bench, not as a suspect, but as someone who had to defend his right to simply be. Not an actor, not a star, not a producer, but a person. His grey suit was simple but fit him perfectly, like armor crafted from restraint. His hands were crossed, his gaze calm, but something deeper smoldered in his eyes, like a long, slow eruption had just begun inside him. On the plaintiff's bench sat Marjorie Hill, the same neighbor who, 2 weeks earlier, had called the police about a stranger who broke into a villa worth over $8 million. Her champagne-colored suit, clearly chosen to look respectable, was overshadowed by her restless tension. She kept glancing at the journalists swarming in the back rows. The cameras, though off, glowed red, waiting like sharks sensing blood. The case is open, said Judge Gray. Ms. Hill, you claim that Mr. Jordan's actions disrupt public order, pose a threat to the neighborhood's safety, and, I quote, provoke cultural erosion. Do you stand by these accusations? Yes, Your Honor, Marjorie said with ironic confidence. This man appeared out of nowhere. None of the residents were informed that the property was changing hands. And now what? Barbecues on the lawn, strangers at night, loud music. This isn't Beverly Glen, this is Harlem. A faint murmur passed through the room, not shock, not surprise, but muted disapproval, not so much for the words as for their subtext. Michael's lawyer, Julia Rice, young and composed, stood up. Ms. Hill, you've had the opportunity to verify the property deed. My client is the legal owner of the house. Do you have any factual evidence that his presence violates the law? Marjorie pursed her lips. I know how the world works. We've spent years building this community, and now he just shows up. Without explanation. Without respect. Michael tilted his head slightly. It wasn't a gesture of conciliation, but of focus, as if he were studying her eyes, searching for a crack. I bought the house because I wanted peace. He spoke for the first time, his voice laced with steel, wrapped in velvet. But it seems even peace comes at a price when you're not the person they expected to see behind the fence. Judge Gray didn't react. She was reading documents. The case will be reviewed expeditiously, she said, but I warn both parties. This courtroom is not a stage for showcasing fears or status. Now, witnesses. The first to be called was Victor Troyan, a 70-year-old veteran and former pilot who lived across the street and usually avoided conflicts. I'm not a fan of movies, he grumbled, but when a transformer blew in our neighborhood, the first person to grab a generator and go door to door was him. Not a politician, not the mayor. Him. And the next day, he was sweeping the street. You know, I don't kick people like that out. Julia Rice nodded. The judge's eyes softened slightly, but her face remained a mask of impartiality. Next, Mrs. Simmons. An elderly black woman in a checkered shawl slowly rose and approached the stand, leaning on her cane. My son died in the desert, and I was left alone, she said calmly. Michael brings me bread every Saturday and asks how I slept. That's more than anyone's done for me in the last 10 years. And yesterday, I was told he's a danger to the neighborhood. A danger? He's the only thing here that's still alive. Silence settled over the room again, not cold but tense. Marjorie nervously tapped her fingers on the bench. Michael sat quietly, but something new flickered in his gaze, as if an invisible chapter of his story had just opened. Marjorie was called to speak. She stood, adjusted the lapels of her suit, and walked to the stand with the air of someone about to say something game-changing. I just want to say that this neighborhood has a reputation. We're all decent people here. And, well, we can't allow someone to disrupt the atmosphere. Her voice trembled slightly. The journalists in the back barely looked up from their notepads. The judge raised her eyebrows. Is that all? Gray asked dryly. Yes, Your Honor. I feel that something's not right here. No evidence, no specifics. Just fear wrapped in a veneer of concern for the atmosphere. The judge closed the case that same day, ruling that no violations were found, and the matter was concluded. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen over the hills, Michael heard a knock at the door. Slow but insistent, the kind of knock from someone unafraid of being intrusive. He opened it. There she was. Marjorie, the same mix of perfume and passive aggression. Mr. Jordan, I'm not here about yesterday, she began with exaggerated politeness. I just thought, is everything okay with your plumbing? There was a strange smell from your house last night, and I noticed you don't seem to have pool filters installed. That's a violation, isn't it? Michael looked at her calmly. His eyes were a silent mirror, reflecting her futile anger. The plumbing's fine, the pool's fine too, and it seems you've run out of ways to spend your morning. She faltered slightly but didn't back down. She peered into the yard, probably hoping to find something. An unapproved structure, a noisy party, cigarette butts, anything. But it was pristine, clean, well-kept, quiet. I'm just concerned about our neighborhood, she said, stepping back. And if something's wrong here, I'll be the first to know. Michael just smiled. All right, Ms. Hill, if you ever get genuinely curious about who I am, come by for tea. But if you keep trying to make me the enemy, I'll just remind you, I'm here for the long haul. She turned and left without a word, leaving behind the scent of her perfume and the aftertaste of defeat. Michael watched her go, standing in the doorway of a home that had now truly become his fortress. He knew this wouldn't be her last visit, but there was no anger in him anymore, just the quiet confidence of someone who no longer had to prove they belonged. Weeks passed. After Marjorie's failed attempt at another home raid, the neighborhood's interest in Michael B. Jordan waned. People began to realize he wasn't just some Los Angeles celebrity. He was a neighbor who genuinely wanted to be part of the community. One day, he helped a couple from the next street fix an old fence. A few days later, he personally funded new books for the school library when he heard their budget had been cut. The neighborhood kids adored him, not for his movie roles, but because he listened and always had time for them. Marjorie stopped coming by. She gave a curt nod when passing him. Maybe she still wasn't thrilled, but public opinion had shifted, and she had no choice but to accept it. One Saturday, the neighborhood square hosted a picnic, organized through the collective efforts of the residents, though everyone knew Michael had covered most of the costs. He sat quietly on a folding chair, holding a glass of lemonade, smiling as he watched people finally start to feel like one big family. "Michael," a little girl called, holding a balloon, "can we go to your yard again and play soccer?" "Sure," he grinned, "but this time you've got to beat me, because I went easy on you last time." The children's laughter filled the air. Yes, sometimes it seemed the world had grown cynical and divided. But in one small neighborhood, where distrust and prejudice once reigned, a new breath of life emerged, thanks to a man who didn't fight, but simply lived authentically. Michael B. Jordan stayed for good, and everything was all right.